what do they really care about? Because even the biggest organization in the world can only really handle 4 or 5 key priorities at any one time. And they're the things that the executives care about. So the question is, what do they really care about? What are their top priorities that you can help them with?
Hey y'all, welcome to Selling with Social, the podcast that helps marketers increase marketing qualified leads, sales reps to shatter sales results, and sales leaders to grow as leaders. Each show, we interview sales, marketing, and social media practitioners, leaders, and influencers to help you connect, close more deals, build stronger relationships with clients, and improve your sales productivity. I'm Mario Martinez Jr. You're now listening to Selling with Social. Mr. Steve Hall, I am super excited to have you here today with me on Selling with Social. Thank you so much, my friend, for joining me on today's podcast.
And thank you very much from sunny Sydney.
From sunny Sydney, that you are. From down under, my friend. You are in the future, if I'm not mistaken, so you can tell me everything that is going on in the world, including all the great news that's happening within the United States.
I can indeed. There's lots happening.
Fantastic. Mr. Steve Hall, I am excited to have you here on the program. You are not only a friend of mine, but also somebody who I respect, somebody who I've grown to love their content as it pertains to executive sales coaching. And we've got a great topic for those people that are listening. And we've got sales leaders, we've got sales people, we've got marketing leaders, sales enablement folks who are listening in to selling at the C-suite. And you, my friend, are one of our resident experts. So love to talk about theory, love to talk about perspective. And I know that you yourself are that particular expert. So before I get into this program, do me a favor. Just tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
I specialize in helping people sell at C-level, as you mentioned. I had, 20 years in IT as support, marketing, project manager. I got my first sales job when I was 42, selling ERP systems. I was with that company for 11 years. Then I moved to Paris as a global account manager. And then I left, I was in charge of selling worldwide for the ERP company. And then when I left Paris, I came back to Sydney and I've been working for myself, helping people for 8 years now.
Only 8 years. That's it.
Yep, that's right.
But it seems like a lot longer, my friend, than that, based upon your presence out online and some of the content that you put out. So it's exciting. Let me ask you a question before we get started here. Everybody wants to know, what is one thing that nobody would know about you by looking at your social profiles?
Oh, I think I put much of it out there. I mean, the one thing that I do tell people is I'm a big fan of the huge football club, Swindon Town.
Wait, what is it called?
Swindon Town. They're in the 4th level of football in England. So they're very much not a big team, but hey, there will be one day. And
when you say football, are you referring to soccer or are you referring to...
What you would call soccer, yes.
What we would call soccer, yeah. Okay, so that what we would call football over here is, we're thinking NFL, but what you call football over there is soccer.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing is I do a fair few ocean swims here.
You do what?
Ocean swimming, swimming in the ocean, races.
Interesting. And you do that for fun?
Yeah, just to avoid the sharks and jellyfish.
The key is avoid sharks and jellyfish while swimming. You live the life of danger, my friend, a life of danger. I love it. Well, I know today we've got some interesting conversation. And as I mentioned before, you specialize in helping people sell at the C level. And, we talk about this all the time in sales. It's almost cliche to say, you sell at the C-suite. But let's start out with talking about why selling at the C-suite is very important.
Okay, I'll tell you a very quick story. When I was in Paris, I was working on 2 deals. One was 4.4 million euros, so about $8 million. The other was about $6 million. One of them I dealt with the C-level in the largest publisher in the world, all the managing directors, all the countries I was working at. I closed that deal. The other deal I was dealing purely with the international CIO. We'd agreed to sign the contracts. And then 3 weeks beforehand, that company lost $50 million in a totally unrelated area, and all selling was stopped. And because I didn't have that relationship right at the top, I had nowhere to go. And that particular situation cost me $300,000 in commission. So that was a good reason to sell at the C level, because people at the C level can cancel a deal at a whim or based on something unrelated. And if you don't have that relationship, if you haven't sold value at the very top, then you've got nowhere to go. So that's one of many reasons. If someone at executive level has to sign off on the deal, then there has to be something in it for them. And that means that you don't particularly want someone selling to them on your behalf, because no one can make your case as well as you can. So if you've got access to the people that sign off and they understand what they're signing off on, you've got a much better chance of a deal going through. And the other thing is that people at the top, they set strategy, they understand, they take a company-wide view, they understand why they want something. It's not just a question of what they want, but why they want it. And if you can start at that level, then you've got a much better chance of winning. And another reason is that if you enter a company at executive level and then get referred to other people, you've got that cachet, the reputation of being a confidant of the executives. If you start low and work up, you're always seen as being someone who works in the IT department. So there's a number of reasons.
And I would generally agree with everything you just said. I mean, there's no doubt about it that, the C-suite can help you, push a deal along despite company financials, if it makes sense for the company to be able to do something. And certainly if you start out at the mid tier or even the lower tier to work your way up, you all of a sudden become less of a confidant for a C-suite executive. But what I would say though is what you've just described is of course what every person aspires to. But the fact of the matter is, what I have found, even in my own selling, and I used to manage our global accounts organization. It was a $300 million a year business. And of course, our accounts, the deals that we closed were $100 million, $40, $50, $60 million deals, right? So these were big, giant deals. And what I found is, in my experience, especially in the large enterprise and the global enterprise, that a lot of the C-suite folks are not the ones making the decision. The ones that are making the decision are the influencers at that director level, the VP level, the EVP level. So we talk a lot about selling at the C-suite, but I want to challenge you to tell me and help me understand, how do you get there, especially in large global accounts, if in fact those individuals that are in that director, VP, EVP level positions are the ones that are empowered to make those decisions?
Well, I mean, you probably know the book Selling to Veto, and they talk about who the very important person is. So sometimes you're right, the C-suite isn't appropriate. It's the person that makes that decision. But it still holds that if you can get access at the C-suite, they know who's who, and they can refer you down to the people you want to get to. So sometimes the best way to get to the person you want to get to is from the top downwards rather than from the bottom upwards. But every situation is different. I mean, you're talking about $100 million deals to huge organizations. I'm sure there are people listening here who sell $1 million deals to small organizations. So you've got to look at the particular circumstance, the particular organization, and decide where do you want to start, how do you get there, and who do you want to end up with. But my philosophy is it's always better to start higher and work down than start lower and work up.
Mm.
And the question becomes, how do you get access, of course?
Well, that's the very next question is especially, at all levels, right? I mean, we're a small company. We're a small business. We've got 20 some odd folks within our organization. And, I have people starting out with me all the time. And some things I just delete and some things I listen to, some things I forward on. So how do you get to the C-suite and get that attention, whether it's a startup company or it's a Fortune 100 type company?
Okay, well, there's a couple of things. First of all, is the message. What if you happen to be sitting in a plane next to your target, the CEO or whatever, what would you say to get their attention? That's the message. And then you've got the channel. How do you get the message to that person? Now, the message, to me, needs to be, first of all, it needs to start with them. The good thing about selling at an executive level is that, A, they're much easier to find. It's much easier to know who the CEO of an organization is than the person in charge of facilities. So people are easy to find. It's also comparatively easy to understand what they care about, because one of the challenges we have in sales is we tend to start with our product and solution and work outwards. Whereas if you are trying to get to someone at executive level, you should start with the prospect or the customer and work inwards. In other words, what do they really care about? Because even the biggest organization in the world can only really handle 4 or 5 key priorities at any one time. And they're the things that the executives care about. So the question is, what do they really care about? What are their top priorities that you can help them with? And that's what your message should be focused around.
And when you say, what do they really care about? Let's be honest in terms of figuring out what people really care about. There's a couple ways to do that, right? You can figure out what they might care about through social or general trends related to that particular person's role, a CSO, CRO, CXO, COO, whatever it might be, right? But are you referring to like drilling down specific and unique to that individual? Or are you saying, okay, if you're the CMO as an example, the CMO generally has these types of problems, and you try to identify the problem that they generally are trying to solve to your particular solution? Is that what you mean?
To a degree, and what you said is absolutely right. There are general problems that all CMOs have. There's a variation of that depending on the particular industry the CMO is in. A CMO in a company selling iron ore is probably going to have some different priorities to a company selling IT solutions. Then there's the specific company and the geography, the political situation. You can normally get a pretty good idea of what an organization's key priorities are through the annual report. And then there's the individual. So you've got to look at each situation differently. What would a CEO care about generally? Risk, profit, growth, etc. What are the challenges in this particular industry and in this geography? And then what are the issues in this specific company? And then the message is a combination of those. Because don't forget, we're not trying to have a cookie cutter message for all CEOs we're trying to get to. We're looking to get the message for that person that will cut through. Does that make sense?
It does, but how? How do you find the message that will cut through? I mean, you said the 10Ks, the annual reports, but let's put this in the context of those are things that I know of, and those are things that I grew up on learning from, right? But not every company is public. And in fact, most companies aren't that you would sell to, right? And especially in that mid-market swath of accounts. So let's put this in the perspective of if you don't have access to that information, meaning there is no 10K, there is no annual report because they're not a public company, then you have to start understanding generalities based on that particular person's buying persona, right?
Yes and no. I mean, the more specific you are, the more chance you have of cutting through. So let me give you a couple of examples. Okay. A while back, we were approached by a company here in Australia trying to get meetings with senior executives in large retailers. Now, we have to put this in perspective. Large retailers here would be medium retailers in the States. But for Australia, we're pretty big. And we came up with a message for retailers, for CEOs of retailers generally, not for a specific company. And back then, the big issue was online competition. So we came up with a message which was, we want to meet with you to talk about helping you compete better with online retailers. It was a very simple message. And it worked really well. We got 30 plus meetings with senior executives. So that's an example at an industry level. At a company level, the biggest telco here is a company called Telstra. And a while back, we wanted to get a meeting for a very small South African company that wanted to get into see the top people in Telstra. So we came up with a message. We looked at, they had an annual report, they had some specific issues, and we came up with a message that we want to talk to you about helping you open new lines of revenue. And that got us directly through the number 2 in the company. So you do the research that you can do as specifically as you can do it. And that can be, one thing you can do is talk to people that know the company, talk to people in the company. Just because you're trying to get a meeting with the C-suite doesn't mean you can't talk to people lower down and say, what are your top 3 strategic priorities this year? What challenges do you have? You're just not trying to sell to them. You're trying to get information from them.
Yeah, and I have one, when I was back in the seat selling to the Fortune 100, we had a client, and at that time, he was the executive vice president, CIO, and CTO of the company. In this case, at that time, it was a Fortune 14 company. And I remember I asked him, I said, what makes you take meetings from salespeople, your sales consultants? And he said, well, first off, our strategic partners, I'll always meet with our sales brethren, right? The sales reps, to be able to understand, what the latest and greatest is and how I can leverage technology to be able to drive efficiency and costs and those types of things. But relatively for new organizations, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to meet with new vendors. They all want to come to me. The fact of the matter is I've got a 3,000 person IT organization, and there's somebody in our IT organization that is looking for a solution to the problem that they probably can solve. Go talk to that person, right? Not me. He said, however, in the times that I do take meetings with new vendors, it's because they've brought something unique to the table. They're going to share with me something that our competition is doing that I should be doing to be able to one-up them, right? And so he's like, I want to know about insights related to the competition. I want to know about what they're doing so that I can figure out how to one-up them and how to be better, quicker, faster, more efficient, or do something that was going to give me a competitive edge. And I thought that was very interesting and insightful, that many of us don't necessarily look at that in terms of what the competition is doing and looking at that as a leverage point to be able to talk to, in this case, it was a CIO. Does that make sense?
A perfect sense. And it's not just competition, it's also peers. In other words, similar companies that you're not directly competing with.
Yeah, sure.
Everyone wants an edge. Everyone wants to improve efficiency, improve profit. The problem is if you go to someone and say, we want to help you improve your profits, well, it's too generic and anyone can say that. You've got to be more specific. Mm-hmm. But if you say, we want to share what we've been doing with X, Y, Z, obviously you can't, you don't want to be in a position where you seem to be sharing information that you got through a relationship with a customer. In other words, you can't break confidences. If you can give people an edge, they will talk to you. Yeah. And sometimes the answer is, look, I'm not the right person. This is the person to go and speak to. And that's a good result, because then you've got a referral to the right person from the top.
Yeah, fair. I would argue, though, that especially when you're looking at global accounts, that oftentimes it's a value to talk with those that are, in that director, VP, EVP level positions to understand what is actually happening and what are the hot buttons that may be applicable to the C-suite before getting into the C-suite's office. What do you think about that particular statement?
I think it's very true. Again, it's everything depends upon the particular circumstance. If you're already dealing with EVP level and you want to get into the C-suite, the question is, why do you want to get in the C-suite? The worst thing you can do is get into the C-suite and have nothing to say.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too is the challenge that sales reps always have is, as you said earlier, if I start with the VP of whatever it might be or the director of whatever it might be, then it's very difficult to move up, because now someone can block you, or now someone says, I'm your point of contact, or I'm the right POC. How do you move up when you start out at these levels and have conversations? How do you move up into the next levels?
Well, the answer to that blocking question is you get your CEO or your manager to work at the next level. Sure, I'm talking to you, and my CEO wants to speak to your CEO.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an answer. It's not the only one, but that's probably the best answer.
Yeah. So team level selling.
Yeah.
Which begs the question of how many, whether it be manager, director, vice presidents, or CSOs, CROs, are actually looking at their top potential prospective clients that they want to penetrate, and they themselves are trying to penetrate those particular offices.
Not enough is the answer. I mean, I had a client recently, and I had a list of organizations they wanted to get into, and the company that owned them, the chairman and the vice chairman of that company were both incredibly well connected. Yeah. But they had no interest in providing referrals to their equivalents in the target companies. And I said, well, this is stupid. You own this company. You wanted to succeed. You wanted to get into these organizations, but you're trying to do it through not the most efficient means, when this guy could pick up the phone and introduce you.
Yeah, nothing frustrates me more when an executive that is asking their salespeople to sell is A, not looking for the opportunity to make a referral, B, won't actually take the time to do the selling. Because if I'm as a salesperson, if I've gotten in at a director or VP level and I need you to get in at peer level, CX, whatever it might be, and you are my CXO, you got to do some work, right? You got to actually, there needs to be a dedicated prospecting time for the C-suite to turn around and ask their admins to engage with admin to admin so that they can actually book meetings and book appointments for themselves to be out there prospecting. And it's nothing frustrates me more when the leaders are coming to town. This is what I love. The leader come into town into a particular area and they say, all right, who am I meeting with? Well, who did you reach out to meet with? That's what I want to know.
Well, yes, you're right. And it's not just that, because they will say, get out there and get those meetings with people at my level. And well, how many SDRs do you talk to? And how many, and do you want, the SDR model where you've got junior people calling senior people? I say to executives, how much do you like talking to junior people who just want to qualify you?
Yeah, absolutely. That's very funny. In fact, I've been involved in the sales process, and this is an interesting story where the company reached out to us, and we actually have a need. We have a need for purchasing software, and it just happened to be good timing, right person. And I wrote an email back to the SDR, and I said, Mr. SDR, I'm glad you reached out. Thanks so much. 1, we have a need. 2, we have a budget. 3, we need to make a purchase by this particular period of time. 4, you weren't on my radar screen, but now after having reviewed what you guys can do and the integration that you have, I didn't realize that you probably might be a perfect fit. So here's what I'd like to do. Please have your CEO reach out to me because I want to talk about whether or not you might be a good fit based upon our timeline, which is a 30-day window timeline. So what did the SDR and the director of sales attempt to do? They attempted to say, well, my CEO is very busy, and why don't you work with us first, and we'll determine whether or not there's a good fit. Let me first get on the phone with you and understand what you're trying to do. And what was so ironic to me here, Steve, was, look, buyers are smarter today than sellers have gotten at selling, right? They've gotten smarter at buying than sellers have gotten at selling. First off, I told you I reviewed your website. Secondly, I told you I reviewed all the things. Now, I don't know if it's a perfect fit until we go through the process. But one thing I am smart enough to know is that we're going through an evaluation, and you may be a really good fit. But here's what I'm trying to streamline. I specifically said we have a very small window. I want to speak to your CEO and have a discussion about whether or not you would be a good fit for us. Now, what he didn't realize, and they didn't realize, is putting 2 + 2 = 4, was that I'm not looking for product information with the CEO. I could care less about the product information. That's for somebody else on the team to do. What I care about is do I have your commitment to meet my timeline before we move forward? That's what I cared about. And they missed it completely. And so what did I do? I ignored them until the CEO reached out to me and said, hey, I'm on vacation actually right now. Can I have you meet with my team? And the answer was, yes, I'll meet with your team. Now let's arrange an executive level discussion. And still, interestingly enough, to this day, the sales team and the CEO has not arranged an executive level discussion. And that's the crazy part about this is I'm sitting here and I'm waiting on them. You know my requirement, but you're not smart enough to understand the buyer signals that tell you what I want and when I want it. And oh, by the way, I have the CEO's cell phone number. And this is what I wrote back to them. Guys, neither of you have even looked at my LinkedIn profile to see that I'm connected to your CEO already. By the way, I left him a voicemail. And that's really the challenge, is that the data is already there. Buyers can do what they want.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. How many messages on LinkedIn do you get offering you what you already sell?
That's a great point. That one kills me. It absolutely kills me. So we've got a limited time here, and I want to know from your perspective, you've scheduled your first meeting. How do you recommend sales reps prepare for this C-level executive meeting?
Okay, great question. There's some obvious stuff. You need to know what your objective is. I mean, that should be obvious, although I'm not 100% sure that a lot of people do. But why are you having the meeting? What are you trying to achieve? What is the next step? What do you want? If the meeting went perfectly, how would it go? That's the first question, right? The next question is flip that around and look at it from the prospect's perspective. What's their objective? They've taken the meeting for a reason. What are they trying to get out of it? And how can you make sure that they get the meeting, that they get their objective? What would constitute a good meeting from their point of view? The next question is, okay, what insights can you give them? You can't go on, if you meet a C-level executive and say, what keeps you awake at night, you'll bounce 3 times as you go out the door. So you've got to be able to provide some insights, some value to them to make them think it was a worthwhile meeting. And you've got to think of the questions you can ask, but not the generic questions. The questions like, I was reading your annual report and you said this, that, and the other, and that seems to me that you're trying to do this. Am I right? That's a vaguely intelligent question. So you've got to come up with some questions that are specific, that are intelligent, and that will not only get the answers that you want, but that will show that you've done your research and you know your stuff. You should also think about I don't like the word objections, but what are they likely to ask you that you're going to have to answer, and how are you going to respond to that? You need to think about, okay, what is the next step? What do I want the result of this meeting to be? Is it another meeting? Is it? I don't think it would be a demonstration because you're too high level for that. But what do you want for the next step? And also the next question is, how can I create a path back to this executive when he refers me to someone else? Because often they'll say, yeah, I like what you're saying, go and speak to these guys, and then these guys block you or just something happens and you can't get back. So you've got to think of a way to set a path back to them so that you can say, okay, I'll come back and tell you what happened and we'll review it. So there's some of the things, and obviously you've got to do your research. You've got to understand what their priorities are, what their strategic objectives are, what the guy himself or herself are like. The more that you go in there knowing the other person, the better.
I love it. That's some great piece of advice. Before we close out here on this particular podcast, what I'd like to know from you, Mr. Hall, is how can someone connect with you? Is it through Twitter, through LinkedIn? What's the best way to connect with you?
Best way for me is LinkedIn. # Steve Hall Sydney, you'll find me.
Okay. And Steve Hall, STEVEHALL. We'll put that actual LinkedIn profile link into the show notes as well. And one of the questions I always ask all of our guests, Steve, is related to your all-time favorite movie. What is it?
Chariots of Fire.
What is it?
Chariots of Fire won the 1981 Academy Award.
Okay. All right. I don't think I've ever, maybe I have seen it. I don't think I've seen that one.
It's a movie about the 1924 Olympics and 2 British runners that won gold medals in it.
No kidding. Okay.
I was a marathon runner at the time it came out, and it's my wife's favorite movie too. She was a runner.
Ah, gotcha. So it was close to home for you. Absolutely.
In fact, my wife has watched it about 75 times.
Oh, wow. So it is a favorite movie then. I love it. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Steve Hall, the expert on selling to the C-suite, gave you some awesome, amazing tips there. I want all of you guys to stay tuned for this particular message right here. Thanks so much for joining me on that episode of Selling with Social. I hope you found as much value in that episode as I did. Here's what I want you to do next. Please go to www.vengreso.com. That's VENGRESO.com. VENGRESO.com. And make sure that you get access to our content. We've got the latest and greatest in digital sales, sales training, content marketing, and social selling strategies that are going to help you grow your sales pipeline. I look forward to having you on the next show of Selling with Social. Make sure you also go to vengreso.com/podcast to be able to get access to the latest and greatest Selling with Social episodes, along with any of the other episodes that we've got from Social Business Engines with my friend and partner, Bernie Borges. Thanks again for joining on Selling with Social.